After my mother died, my father told us not to waste the body. The last thing my mother ever said to me was, "Don't let him waste me." I was 16. I held her hand, a thing of bone and paper-thin skin inside my own giant paw, and I just nodded, my throat too tight to make a sound. Her eyes were milky, staring at the ceiling beams of our little cabin. Her breathing was a wet rattle in her chest. Then it wasn't anything at all. The silence she left behind was worse than the dying. It was a thick, heavy blanket that smothered the crackle of the hearth fire. I sat there for a long time, listening to it, listening for something else. And then I heard it, the scrape of the bolt on the basement door, a heavy iron sound that vibrated up through the floorboards. I'd spent my entire life dreading that sound. You have to understand. My world was very small then, a patch of cleared land carved out of the deep gut of the Appalachian Mountains, a place where the fog hangs so thick in the mornings you can't see the woods for the white, and the stars at night are so bright they hurt your eyes. It was just me, my twin brother Oysen, my younger sister Sorcha, and our mother Ayala. And the thing in the basement. Our mother was like a dandelion seed that had blown in and somehow taken root in our dark, stony soil. She was small and fair, with hair like spun moonlight and a smile that could calm a spooked horse. We, her children, were the opposite. By 12, we all towered over her. Our hair was a shock of raven black, our eyes dark as polished river stones. We were built like oaks, all of us, thick, strong, and not quite right. Life was a rhythm of chores. We fed the chickens, milked the one cow, tended the meager garden. Food was never a problem. We ate meat every single day, pork mostly. Ayala would say, her voice a gentle song against the hiss of the frying pan. It was the law of our house. Old shirts became cleaning rags. Rags became tinder. Animal hides, and there were always animal hides, were stretched and tanned into leather for our boots and coats. Nothing was ever thrown away. It seemed a good life. A hard one maybe, but a good one. Ayala taught me to read from the few books she brought back from her rare trips to the town a few days' ride away. She was forbidden to take us. People out there are different, she'd say, her eyes distant. They wouldn't understand our ways. Oysen and Sorcha didn't care about books. They were creatures of the outside. Oysen could fell a sapling with a single swing of his axe, and I once saw him lift the back end of our cart, mule and all, just to prove he could. He loved the raw feeling of his own strength. Sorcha was quieter, but just as wild. She'd disappear into the woods for hours and come back with her apron full of mushrooms or berries, or sometimes with a brace of rabbits, their necks expertly broken. Often, she'd lead us to one of her deadfall traps where a deer or even a black bear lay crushed. Ayala praised them for their hauls. More meat for the table, more hides for tanning, nothing wasted. But she doted on me. I was the quiet one, the inside one. I'd sit at her feet by the fire while she mended our clothes, her tiny hands moving with a practiced grace my own clumsy fingers could never match, and I'd read to her from Twain or Dickens. In those moments, with her soft voice humming along, I could almost forget the shadow that lived under our feet. I could almost feel normal. My father, we never saw him, not really. He was a presence, a provider. He left before dawn, a huge hulking shape I'd sometimes see from my window, moving against the pre-dawn gray. He'd return long after we were in our beds. His return was announced by the groan of the outdoor cellar doors, and then, later, by sounds from below. Ayala's sounds. They weren't screams. Not exactly. They were sharp, keening howls that twisted and turned between pleasure and agony. They'd go on for hours, while the house itself seemed to groan around us. Oysen would just roll over and sleep. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, my knuckles white under the quilt. Sorcha's birth was the only time the routine broke. I was small, maybe 5. I just remember Ayala being gone for 2 days. Then she came up from the basement, pale and hollowed out, but smiling that brilliant, desperate smile of hers. She held a swaddled, screaming baby with a startling amount of thick, black hair. The sheets she'd wrapped herself in were stained a deep, rusty brown. The coppery smell hung in the air for a week. One night, when I was about 15, Oisin and I were watching the moon from our window. The air smelled of pine and cold stone. We heard Ayala's cries from the basement, fainter than usual, and then a different sound. A voice. It was a rumble, so deep it was more a feeling in my chest than a sound in my ears, like rocks grinding together far underground. "What do you think he's really like?" I whispered. Oisin grunted, his eyes fixed on the tree line. "Strong. Has to be. Look at us." He was right. We were unnaturally strong. But that wasn't what I meant. But what's he like? Does he think? Does he feel anything? Just then, the basement doors opened. The shadow that was our father stepped out into the moonlight. He wore no hat, carried no rifle. His form was dense, corded with muscle, visible even in the gloom. As he passed the mule tethered to the post, I felt my breath catch. The mule looked like a foal next to him. He was immense, a giant. Then he began to move. Not a walk, not a run. It was a long, loping stride, an undulating canter that ate up the ground without a sound. He flowed over the split-rail fence and melted into the woods, gone as quick as a blown-out candle flame. The sight of him, the pure animal power of his movement, chilled me deeper than any winter wind. The next morning, Ayala didn't come up to make breakfast. That was the start of it. I called down the stairs for her, but only a weak moan answered. Eventually she emerged, leaning heavily on the banister, her face the color of ash. A sickness had taken root in her, and it was a hungry, rapid thing. It ate the flesh from her bones and stole the light from her eyes. I took care of her. I cooked, I cleaned, I read to her as she sat huddled in blankets by the fire, shivering even as sweat beaded on her brow. Oisin and Sorcha grew distant. They spent more and more time outside, their anger and fear channeled into a frenzy of hunting and chopping. They started to look ragged, their hair matted, their eyes holding a feral gleam. They were shedding the part of them that was Ayala's. One afternoon, I was trying to get her to drink some broth. Her hand trembled as she pushed the spoon away. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Zephon," she rasped, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. "He smells it on me, the decay." "What are you talking about, Ma?" "When I'm gone," she said, her eyes boring into mine, "you run. You take the horse, and you ride east until you hit water. You don't ever look back. Do you hear me?" A world without her was a black, empty thing I couldn't stand to imagine. A world alone with him, that was a nightmare. I just held her hand and cried. A week later, she died. Her last breath went out, and the silence rushed in. And then the scraping of the bolt below. Heavy, deliberate footsteps on the stone stairs. Slap, slap, slap. Each one a hammer blow against my heart. Oisin and Sorcha had come in from outside, drawn by the sudden quiet. They stood behind me, not sad, but waiting. Expectant. The door swung inward. The books Ayala gave me had pictures of men. Farmers, kings, sailors. I knew what a man was supposed to look like. The thing that stood in the doorway was not a man. It had to stoop to fit through the frame. It was covered, head to foot, in thick, greasy black fur, matted with filth and dried blood. Its face was a nightmare of squashed, brutish features, with a flat nose and a mouth full of yellowed, tusk-like teeth. Its eyes were small, black, and horribly intelligent. It smelled of damp earth, musk, and old meat. It looked at the three of us, then its gaze settled on the chair where our mother's body lay. It padded over to her, its movements unnervingly silent for something so large. With a gentleness that was somehow the most obscene thing I had ever witnessed, it stroked her hair. Then it scooped her up, her tiny frame looking like a child's doll in its massive, shovel-like hands. "Come," it rumbled, the sound vibrating through my bones. It turned and descended back into the darkness. And we, its children, followed. The basement was a charnel house. The stench hit me like a fist, a gagging mix of blood, offal, and rot. Great sides of meat, dark and marbled, hung from iron hooks. Against the far wall was a pyramid of bones, cleaned and stacked. Dozens of human skulls stared out from the pile with empty sockets. Piles of worn clothing, rusted tools, and cracked leather satchels were strewn about. Human skin was stretched on tanning racks. Our entire lives had been built on the flesh of travelers and lost souls. The pork we ate, the leather on our feet, it was all people. He laid Ayala's body on a massive stone table, stained black with the blood of generations. With delicate, practiced motions, he stripped off her dress, her underthings. He tied a cord around her ankles. He carried her to an empty hook and hung her upside down, her pale hair cascading toward the floor like a golden waterfall. "Waste not, want not," the beast grunted. Before I could even process it, Oisin and Sorcha stepped forward. They moved without hesitation, picking up heavy, well-used knives from the table. My father nodded once, a gesture of approval. I could only stand there, frozen, as my own brother and sister fell upon our mother's body like wolves. Oisin cut her throat. A deep, wet gash from which her life's blood poured onto the stone floor. Sorcha sliced open her belly, her small hands pulling out the organs with a clinical efficiency, laying them neatly on the table. My father began to skin her, peeling back her flesh with long, expert strokes of a flensing knife. My mind shattered. This wasn't grief. It was something else, something colder and sharper. A horrifying, absolute understanding. They worked in silence. They were a family, completing a chore. Her thighs were becured for ham. Her backstrap set aside for roasting. Her tongue, a delicacy. Her bones boiled for stock. Nothing wasted. How long I watched, I don't know. At some point, the beast, my father, turned to me. He held out a knife. The handle was yellowed bone, polished smooth with use. It was a human femur. He was offering it to me, inviting me to join in, to take my portion. That's what broke me. I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. I just turned and ran. I scrambled up the stairs, burst out of the cabin door into the cold night air, and didn't stop. I ran to the paddock, my hands shaking so badly I could barely unhitch the mule. I threw the old saddle on its back, not even bothering to cinch it tight. As I fumbled with the reins, the basement door opened again. The three of them stood there in the moonlight. They had shed their clothes, their last pretense of humanity. Oisin and Sorcha were covered in a thick down of dark hair I'd never noticed before, their forms thick and stooped. They looked like smaller, leaner versions of the beast that stood between them. My family. They didn't chase me. They just stood there, watching me, their heads tilted as they sniffed the air. On the last day of October, a very long time ago, I rode east and never, ever looked back. I am an old man now. I have lived 100 lives under 100 different names. I've always stayed on the move, always felt the shadow of those mountains at my back. I don't age like other people. I'm still tall, still strong. My body has held on to its monstrous inheritance. I'm writing this because of something I saw last week. A young man who lives in my apartment building showed me this thing, this internet. He showed me how to find old films. He thought I'd be interested in historical footage, and I was. He showed me a shaky piece of film, taken in 1967 by a pair of men named Patterson and Gimlin. It showed a creature, tall and hairy, walking through a clearing in the woods. It strode with a long, familiar, loping gait. Halfway across the creek bed, it turned. It looked back over its shoulder, directly at the camera. The slope of its shoulders, the swing of its arms, the look of profound annoyance and contempt on its face. 150 years is a long time. But I'd recognize my sister anywhere. She looked right at the camera. And for a second, I swear to God, she was looking right at me.